$1 trillion. In $100 bills, that's 10 feet high, the size of a football field that weighs 11,000 tons. That's more than the Eiffel Tower. It's also more than our government spends every 88 days. Who will be the world's first trillionaire? If history repeats, it will be someone we do not know, likely in the next decade. I also believe that person or team will have created many trillions in market value by creating, catalyzing, realizing, and scaling consciousness for the planet. More value than Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook combined. I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey to go a little further. First, I'd like to invite all of you to join me in a synchronized breath. A few counts in, a few counts hold, a few counts release. Beautiful. A little bit about who I am and why I'm here. How did I end up here? I would not be here at all if it wasn't for the desire, passion, perseverance, and will of my ancestry, lineage, who is on here, this stage, with me right now. I also happen to be the project and product of two countries and cultures. My native is Western India, where I was born in Ahmedabad, Gujarat. I came to the States at 2. I lived and traveled around most of the United States, the Midwest, the East, the South, the Pacific Northwest, and found my way to the San Francisco Bay Area 20 years ago this month. By career, I have a training in physics and computer science, and I also can say that about half my career has been Wall Street, and about half has been Silicon Valley. I also like to think of myself as having lived in these 3 corners of the triangle. The one I started on was entrepreneur, founder, did that a few times, and the one that ended up sticking was an investment firm that Nicole talked about, which was a hedge fund investment firm that we had the fortune of growing from $1 million in assets to a couple billion over a decade without any down years. And after running that global business for a decade, I also had the fortune of realizing a liquidity event in monetizing my stake, which ended up giving me the ability to work for myself and no other investors. And so I ended up becoming what we call a family office, which has been my focus for the last 9 years in a proprietary investment firm that thinks about the world 10 or 20 years out and imagines the world that we truly want to be in. On top of that, I also had my own personal spiritual or consciousness journey over the last 6 years. And the guy who I just told you about that sold that investment firm was right here. That was me about 7 years ago. And through a collection of a number of experiences, which included things like psychedelics and Burning Man and plant medicines, about 4 to 5 years later, we got to this guy, which was me 2 years ago. And what I realized in this journey is I never have to choose between any of these two guys ever again, because the person in front of you is the 7th iteration over the last 6 years. And I'm excited to report that each are me, and I now have been gifted the ability to synthesize and channel all of my backgrounds into highest purpose and highest service to all life. And today, my practice, which I'm very fortunate to share with some of you that you know, is a combination of spirituality. Up until last year, I meditated a total of an hour in my entire life. Nothing ever stuck with me. Couldn't do 5-10 minutes at a stretch. And now it's a couple hours a day for the last year and a half. And it has absolutely changed my existence. And I lead much more the life of a monk than not by choice. So a little bit, that's about me. Now let's take a walk deeper into exploring what I'm here to talk about, which is consciousness, capitalism, and technology. When I started on this path, it was an interesting question to tackle and go deeper on what actually is consciousness. And if you ask 100 people, you may actually get 100 answers. I learned. Well, we started with Merriam-Webster. It says sentience or awareness of internal or external existence. It seemed interesting to me. Oxford says it's the fact of awareness of the mind, of itself, and the world. There we go. And then I also started asking some of my conscious friends, hey, what's consciousness? My buddy Josh, the ability to perceive reality clearly, accurately, and comprehensively. My friend Randall, a sense of connectedness and oneness. Personally, I don't believe in choosing. I like all of these. Why consciousness? It's a very common question. People say, shouldn't we be working on other things, that we're all going to disappear as a humanity? I humbly beg to differ. Once we can realize our true essence into one collective whole beyond time and space, don't you think we have a better chance of solving every other problem? Let's talk a little bit about capitalism now, which is a very common thread many people like to chat about. I don't think we can do justice to dissecting what capitalism is today until we can really understand the past and the evolution of our species. When starting to look deeper, I decided to go back around 50,000 years, which by most accounts is when we started out and migrated from Africa to Europe and Asia for the first time as the origin of our species. So what's happened since we first arrived on this planet in our current form? Well, let's go through some markers. The first is we started owning land after becoming farmers and the beginning of the agrarianism movement, which was about 10,000 years ago. And all of a sudden, this created the first form of separation, which is my land versus your land, or my grain versus your grain. The next thing that happened along the way is we started seeing the creation of empires and nation states, the first empire being the Akkadian and Assyrian Empire around 2,500 BC. And then we saw the rise of countries that we have today, the first being Japan and San Marino, believe it or not, 2,500 years ago. And this became a story of my country versus your country. And then, of course, we get to church, religion, and the holy wars a couple thousand years ago, still going on to this day. My God versus your God. And then we start getting to the Industrial Revolution, a couple hundred years ago, where we saw for the first time the use of machinery and tools, leveraging steam engine, textiles, manufacturing equipment. Didn't exist before, and that was the birth of modern day capitalism. And capitalism, in my understanding, is not just financial capital, but also human capital and labor and social capital and influence, which of course leads us to being where we are today, in the heart of Silicon Valley, living in the center of the information age, which only goes back a handful of decades to really accelerate this path of capitalism. But what's also interesting, if we look on this entire continuum and curve, up until that very, very end in the 1800s, 200 years ago, for the entirety of this arc and journey for us as a species, we have lived, created, worked, traveled, played, and learned in packs, tribes, groups, and clans. That's 99.5% of the history of our species. It's only this last couple centuries that we've been living in this phase of labor specialization, driving productivity, driving GDP growth, driving per capita income, driving individuality, driving isolationism. It is only in that period that we have been living through this separation. So let's talk a little bit about capital. What is capital other than just energy? Just like the food gets energy from the sun, it collects that energy as potential energy, and when it meets our bodies, it turns into actual energy. I think money and capital is no different, other than just stored potential energy. When it collides with people, ideas, companies, and projects, it turns into actual and kinetic energy. I'd also like to offer a discussion or an energy on a truth that I hold dear, which is that the energy we transmit to the world and the universe is that energy we attract and what comes back. So now I'd like to chat a little bit about the energy of scarcity versus abundance, independent of financial resources. Many people instantly think about money. I would like to open the discussion on an energetic level and prove to you with a couple of counterexamples this has nothing to do with money. I'm sure we all can point to some people with a huge amount of financial resources that, in my opinion, lead lives of scarcity. They think everyone's out to get them and wants a piece of them and get more and more isolated. And perhaps it's a perpetual feedback loop because they put out that scarcity energy, attracting the same energy back. And at the other end of the spectrum, I can point to a number of people I know with no financial resources that lead lives of supreme abundance because they are willing to give you that last piece of food because they know the universe will provide and there'll be more. So what do you think has happened when these stewards, creators of capital are putting out scarcity energy? What do you think is happening? Now we get on to tech. Why tech? Many people have been predicting its demise for a very long time. I believe tech has been one of the greatest salvations of our species. And if it wasn't for innovation, we would have disappeared a long time ago. So where are we with tech today? Well, here is just a little bit of information on what we are living as we speak. If we go back just 29 years ago and look at the top 10 market cap countries in the world, only one was technology related. That was IBM, 64 billion in market cap. Fast forward to today, we have 7 out of the top 10 at 5.1 trillion in value. And over those 29 years, this was through at least 3 crises. 80x value creation. Now, what does this mean is going to happen in the next decade? It's a kind of a hard belief for me to see this reversing. I think it's only going in the same direction. How did you get in here? Really? Gigamons? Who invited you to this chat? Anyways, so back to what happened in technology? 20 years ago, if we started a Web 1.0 business, it took $5 million and 18 to 24 months from when we set up our shingle to when we can get our website launched. Today, that has gone down to 50 grand in a couple months to get an app launched. So we've seen a 10x reduction in time, 100x reduction in cost, lowering the barriers of entry. Again, I don't see that trend reversing. On the other side, we also have seen a complete explosion in addressable market sizes, consumer enterprise markets that have also multiplied with internet penetration in developed and emerging countries. And that also does not seem to be reversing. And that same dollar that went into a startup 20 years ago is now leveraged 10,000 to 100,000 times with 1,000 size markets for 100th the cost. And for the outliers and the financial outcomes, what we've witnessed and seen is in the past, it was about a decade to realize commercial value of about $1 billion or $2 in an M&A or an IPO. And today, that is 10 to 50 times higher in about 1/3 the time. Also does not seem to be reversing. So now, what does this mean? If you are a hardworking leader, executive, founder, contributor, investor, what do you decide between? I can go to company A, which is creating a lot of economic value for myself and others, that may or may not have a heart or a soul, but is real and it's doing things. Or I can go to company B, that seems really awesome and warm and fuzzy, but not doing anything in creating impact or scale or value. Go with the heart, go with the soul, or go with the pocketbook. This has been the dilemma for a lot of people. I personally believe the word or is a self-limiting construct by definition. The moment we allow or into our house, we've automatically cut ourselves out. Personally, I've moved to an and-based existence, and I don't believe in choosing, which is why we are here to talk about the ARC. This is the company that will change the game, the company that accelerates and realizes consciousness with capitalism. Why and what is the ARC? Well, first of all, this ARC has a lot of room for a lot of people. And once we see the instantiation of this ARC, it will rewire the realities and belief systems for everyone. Those people on one end of the spectrum run out of their excuses that, hey, are you really able to create any significant lasting change or value, Mr. Hippie burner doing medicine every weekend, building an art car? Right? And the other end of the spectrum is like, oh, what are you able to do? Where's your heart? Where's your soul? The same people are talking about capitalism being evil. Capitalism is the problem. Anyone with money is an evil villain. Is that really effective too? So ARC will give both people excuses completely eradicated. How will we know the ARC when we see it? One, it'll be a real product or service with real revenue. And what I mean by that, I'm talking 100 million, billion kind of revenue, doubling or tripling every year. This is not impossible. This is what happened in the early days of Google and Facebook and Uber and Coinbase. This is real life metrics. It will have recruiting leverage. It will be able to hire almost anyone it wants who are willing to come there for a pay cut. Because of the psychic income and because of the strong magnetism, this company will attract to build anyone it wants to get. It will be a lean team. We are running in a time and an age where 2 people can do the work of 200 people 20 years ago. And that leverage is also not reversing. It will be capital efficient because that's also a nice Moore's Law curve we're on. And then last but not least, and perhaps most importantly, it will embody a resonant field as one collective consciousness that has no room for prima donnas, superstars, or egos. It will be all about the collective. And the ARC needs you. There's a lot of room on that ARC. It's going to bridge our current world to the new world. Founders, team members, investors offering capital and advice, lots of customers and business partners. The ARC needs a lot of us. I'd also like to take a moment to announce something here for the first time that is a labor of love that has been years in the making. And that is a new project that was just created this week called Congee, which is consciously originating our infinite global interventions and endeavors. We've set it up as a 501c3 based in Boulder Creek, California, in the Santa Cruz forest and the trees. And as far as Kilowatt Capital, which is definitely the day job and the investment firm, we started out as a family office. Now we look after a small number of outside, a handful of other family offices and institutions. We look after a seed stage technology fund that invests in ideas, people, and projects, building the world that we truly want to live in for ourselves, our loved ones, and future generations. If you're a startup, please find Eric. Eric, are you here? Yeah, Eric's right over there. And if you're an investor, you want to talk more about my path, come find me. And I would also like to end with a visual. This is the arc right here that we're going to build and board as a group. This arc is living in a very divided world. It's a divided world by country, region, language, and culture. We're heavily divided by politics right now. We're divided by religion. We're divided by gender. However, if we can all somehow find a way to come together as one with high energy, we have the ability to really synthesize, catalyze a consciousness. And that consciousness and collective oneness is why we're all here to realize.